I wanted to make a video talking about a few of the cultural differences that I've found in coming to Pune, India, versus where I'm from, which is Nova Scotia in Canada. I knew when we came that there would be a culture shock, but I wasn't quite, I guess, aware of how great the culture shock would be because the culture is pretty much, in my opinion, completely different than what I'm used to in Canada. I'm not saying that it's better or worse, it's just different. In Canada, to say hello to somebody, you might shake their hand or you might just say a simple, "Hi, how are you?" But here, a lot of people will say, "Namaste." Of course, one of the major differences between where I live and here would be the heat and the humidity. It's not as hot or as humid where I'm from, and so the clothes are completely different. When I was looking for clothes to come here, I wanted lighter clothes and more summery clothes, and I had a hard time finding them because, of course, I was shopping in fall, and that's when there'd be more fall and winter clothes out, so that was my fault for shopping at the wrong time of year. And here, it seems like wherever I shop, the clothes are very light, seems to be designed to let your skin breathe. And their winter wear that I saw, it looks like hoodies to me, like just a regular hoodie that somebody might wear where I'm from on a chilly summer night or in the fall. I discovered our first few days here, and that would be, and I don't know how else to describe it, but it seems to be a sort of head bobble that people in Pune, however you pronounce this city's name, do. And I was so curious at first, I didn't know if I was seeing things right. And then I wondered, is there something in this person's ear that they're trying to shake out? So it kind of looks a little bit like this. I hope this isn't offensive, but that's what it looks like to me if somebody is talking with somebody else, and it was really difficult for me to understand because I don't understand the language. So I would see people talking with each other, and then they might start doing this. And then as we got out and about ourselves and started talking and lightly haggling, because we're not good at haggling, people would start to do this if they were agreeing with things, or that's what it seems like. And I looked it up, of course, on Google, and it seems to be a gesture of agreement. In Canada, at least where I'm from, what I've experienced, you might do this for yes and this for no. If you're really annoyed with somebody, you might kind of do this if you're irritated with somebody. But I've never seen people do this before or do this. They do that a lot in the restaurant that we're staying at. If we order something, they'll say, "Yes, yes, ma'am." So the head bobble, I don't know what else to call it, is something that I've never seen before anywhere that we've traveled. I'm not sure if it's something that is specific to Pune or if it's something that's specific to India, but I thought that was really cool and very interesting. Canada is not a haggling culture, and I'm horrible at it because I don't really have any experience with it. You walk into a store in Canada or a restaurant and the price is the price. It's really not negotiable. At least in Pune, I am guessing in the entire country of India, but at least in Pune it definitely is. My doctor said that whenever you're out somewhere and somebody quotes you a price, so long as it's a place that invites haggling, which it seems like a lot of places do, somebody gives you a price, you immediately come back with 50% of the price. And then you can come to an agreement of what price you're willing to pay and what the person's willing to sell with. But sellers seem to start high, and then it's up to you to try to work the price down. In Canada, what I've experienced as far as people begging would be somebody would typically either be sitting on the side of the road, they might have a bucket and ask for change, or they might be sitting there with a sign that will just break your heart, saying something along the lines of, "I'm out of work and I haven't eaten all day, please donate some spare change." And people can walk by or not, and I know it's different for everybody, but in my experience, typically I haven't really been approached by somebody in Canada who is homeless. Or there might be in Canada somebody who's waiting by a stoplight and they have their sign saying that their things are difficult, they'd like money, and they might walk up and down the road. as people are stopped and just hope that people will give them spare change. Here, there is lots of beggars by the side of the road. What has made me very uncomfortable is seeing people with small children. For example, one little girl approached our cab as we were on our way somewhere, and she started to dance, hoping that we'd give her money, and she started making this gesture, saying she'd like, I suppose, money to eat. And then we looked, and by the side of the road was her mother, and her mother had a small child. So what I learned was that, and I'm sure it's the same where I'm from as well, what I learned is that this is kind of a business for some of these people, and I'm sure for some it's legit, for some it's business. But for some people it's business. They do it really well for themselves. When they're done with the day, they just kind of pack up whatever, if they have anything to pack up, and go off to wherever they live. But it has been very uncomfortable for me to see babies by the side of the road, or young children, 1 or 2 years old, by the side of the road. And it's also been very uncomfortable with the comfort. I was going to say aggressiveness, but it's not really. It's aggressiveness, but not in a violent way, with the begging that I've experienced in Pune, where if somebody wants money from you and you happen to be stopped at a stoplight, they might come up and start kind of tugging on you, like tugging on your arm to get your attention, or touching you. And that's kind of a taboo in Canada. You don't really touch people that you don't know, because that could start a fight. But here, for some people, we've been kind of tugged on or touched, or my husband, somebody tried to tug on his arm to take him wherever they wanted to take him by the side of the road to get money out of him. And I don't think it was a really rough tug. He said it was a child, but still, it's just kind of like a light, gentle touching by a stranger who would like money from you. And that surprised me. And another thing would be, I learned that an Indian style of begging is to slap somebody's shoes if you would like them to give you some money. And I only learned that by talking to my doctor. We asked him about this child who was asking for money, and he started slapping my husband's shoes, and we had no idea why. And he explained that that's an Indian style of begging. No stranger to the fact that we have homelessness all over Canada. We certainly have homelessness in my little town that I'm from. There's poverty no matter where you go. But what did shock me here was the fact that with where I'm from, there seems to be sections. So there'd be a section for homeless people, or a section for people who aren't doing so well economically, or a middle class section, or a section for people who are doing very well for themselves. And there's definitely a divide, and the differing socioeconomic statuses of people, they really don't tend to mix, in my experience. But here, what I've noticed is that you could walk 5 steps and there's somebody living in a shack, and then walk another 5-10 steps and there's somebody living in an apartment, or maybe somebody sleeping on the side of the road, and right next to that person sleeping on the side of the road, you walk down the road for 20 steps or something, and there's a nice home. So that surprised me, just the, I guess, everybody being mixed up together. And perhaps it's because there's so many people in this particular city. I'm not sure how many millions of people are in this city, but it is a really huge city. There's a lot of people. If you travel to India, in my opinion, you had to look out for price gouging. And, you had to look out for price gouging as a tourist anywhere. I know where I'm from, we know not to eat at the touristy restaurants or shop at the touristy spots, because tourist traps, we call them, the prices are always jacked up. And it's the same here, but also it's like no matter where we go, we seem to be getting charged more because we're foreigners. So a great example would be, we visited the zoo when we first came here, and the price said something like 20 rupees for a local, and if you're a foreigner, 200 rupees. So that was quite the price hike for people to pay just because they're not from the area. And I mean, kudos for the honest price gouging, but there's definitely price gouging. And as far as cabs or rickshaws are concerned, you would have to, in my opinion, be careful about having a decent understanding of what the fare should be, what you're willing to pay, and not getting gouged. For example, I know between going from my doctor's office to my hotel in a rickshaw, typically about maybe 150 rupees or so would be fine. We found one very, very greedy rickshaw driver who immediately, when we said we'd like you to take us somewhere, said 1,000 rupees. I just thought, my goodness, could you imagine if we hadn't known what the price should be? The food here is super, super different than anything I've ever experienced back home. And with that being said, in Pune, you can get all kinds of cuisine. You can have Canadian cuisine, you can have Chinese food, you can have pizza, Italian food, there's lots of Domino's, there's lots of fast food joints that we'd recognize back home, like McDonald's or Burger King. So anything that you want to eat is available here. But the traditional Indian dishes, and I've sampled some, seem to be very tasty, very spicy, very, very spicy. And sometimes I'm just learning how to eat the food. Like you might get something like that looks like a bit of a stew, and then there's bread by the side, and it's up to you to pluck out bits, like take the bread, put it in your hand, and pluck out bits of the food and eat it that way. Or maybe you want to just take it up with a spoon and eat it that way. I'm still trying to learn how to eat some of the Indian dishes here, and getting a lot of giggles from the wait staff and from the chef, which is perfectly fine. I think if you are open to traveling or going to travel anywhere, you've got to be a bit open to being uncomfortable and laughing at yourself. You've definitely got to have a good sense of humor. The toilets here are different. In North American culture, we typically have a sit-down toilet, but a traditional Indian toilet, as I found, is just kind of a hole in the ground, and you have these footrests, I guess, by the side of the toilet, and you're just expected to kind of stand there and squat. And instead of using toilet paper, which I've learned is kind of a North American thing, I know other countries use it, but we're pretty obsessed with our toilet paper in North America. In India, traditionally, I suppose they use water to clean themselves. The strongest thing would be, I suppose, the staring that happens when my husband and I are walking by. And I know that other foreigners who have visited India have, noted the same thing. And it's probably different in different areas, but again, I'm just talking about what I've noticed. So I noticed that the staring in India seems to be more curious, more just people kind of wondering what country you're from, or just perhaps a little bit surprised that there's somebody around who doesn't look Indian or something like that. I suppose the length of the staring, because in Canada, Canadian staring is more like people will be looking at you, and then when you notice that you're being stared at and you look back at the person, they quickly look away and pretend like they weren't staring at you. Because in my opinion, with our Canadian culture, even though people do stare, it is considered to be very, very rude to stare at people. And we're told over and over again as children and also as adults not to stare, don't stare. So people still do it, but when they're caught staring, they quickly look away. With the staring that I've experienced in India, I don't think there's that stigma about staring here. I don't think it's considered to be rude to stare, at least maybe not on the level that it is in Canada. So people will be staring, and then if you go to look back, they'll keep right on staring. And if you stare at them, they'll keep right on staring back. And you have to sit there and stare for a long time before they might look away. But then, of course, if you look away and do something else and you look back at the same person, they might have very well gone back to staring at you all over again. Something that I wasn't prepared for at all, which is the excitement that some people exhibit when my husband and I have shown up. And we learned towards the end of our trip, just maybe a week or so ago, that there's a trend here called, I think it's something like take a selfie with a foreigner. And definitely people have approached us and wanted to take us off somewhere and chat with us and ask us what country we're from, take selfies with us. and got pretty excited about just the fact that we showed up and we're foreign. We've definitely been pointed at and we've heard foreigner, foreigner. So I haven't ever felt uncomfortable about that, but I have thought it was cute, to be honest. And that is definitely a difference that I think, as far as being here versus being in Canada. But with that said, when I'm in Canada, I'm not a foreigner. So maybe other people who have come to Canada to visit or to move there, they would say that we behave the same way. So I'm not sure about that. But I did notice that there was quite a bit of excitement among some people when Drew and I are just kind of walking around not doing anything special in our opinion, just because we're foreign. The personal space, which makes sense because in my small town, there's not a lot of people at all. There's lots of space to spread out, lots of land. If you want a home and you want to have land, it's, relatively cheap. Canada is a big country and it's not, considering the size of the country, it's not really that densely populated. Whereas here, there's just so many people on top of people and stores on top of stores, and, there'll be stores and then there'll be apartments, that's the word I'm looking for, apartments there on top of stores and things. So there's just so many people that the concept of personal space is just different, not better, not worse, it's just completely different than what I'm used to. People definitely stand a lot closer, and you just kind of have to accept the fact that you're not home anymore and that you're going to be a little bit uncomfortable, which I think goes hand in hand with traveling. In Canada, it's kind of considered a bit of a taboo to remove your shoes when you're in a public area. When you go to a friend's home or somebody's private residence, you take off your shoes, but if you're in a mall or in a church or just outside of a private residence, typically you're expected to keep your shoes on. But here we found that in certain places, especially temples or just different establishments, that you are expected to take your shoes off, and that's just the culture here. It's completely normal, and it took my husband and I a little while to get used to, just because we weren't used to that. One difference that I have found uncomfortable here is in certain sections, it's not throughout the whole city or anything like that, but not throughout the whole city that I've visited, but in certain areas there's a lot of trash by the side of the road, and I mean a lot. One place that we passed, it kind of looked like a garbage dump, to be perfectly brutally honest, and it was a bit uncomfortable and a bit of a shock, and it still is, because I'm just not used to seeing that. And there are a lot of stray dogs that are around the area, which you don't really see back where I live. I'm sure this stuff happens in other areas of Canada, but I'm just talking about where I live, in Canada, the province, the town that I live in. We have basically, I guess, dog catchers that would round up any stray animals, and so you don't really see too many stray dogs around. But here in Pune, there are stray dogs all over the place, often just kind of laying by the side of the road, taking naps on the sidewalk. There are also, sometimes there's cows that kind of might wander through the street, or goats might be by the side of the road, and it seems to be more towards the outskirts, not necessarily so much in the city, from what I've seen. So one of the uncomfortable things that I found was watching goats or watching dogs kind of go into these, by the side of the road. If there's trash, they'll maybe go over there and start having lunch or supper and just start eating the trash by the side of the road. So that was something that really surprised me. Where I'm from, there's not a heck of a whole lot of scooters. There's mostly cars and maybe some motorcycles. And here, scooters are absolutely king, to the point where they have little special small spots in some parking lots for scooters, which I've never seen before, so that was fascinating to me. And instead of saying a car or a scooter or a motorcycle like we would back home, they say four-wheeler for cars or two-wheelers for a scooter or a motorcycle. what I really loved about coming here is that friends often hold hands, or they might kind of sling their arm over the shoulder of their friend. And my doctor gave me a prescription for pain medication, and I just filled that. And the person just kind of looked and then got me the prescription, which is different from back home, because back home usually they're like, oh, we'll fill your prescription in an hour or so, and they look up all the other stuff that you're on and stuff like that, and then they give you your prescription in an hour or so, or more longer, depending on if they're backed up with other prescriptions. But this time, the guy down the street just kind of gave me my prescription back with my drugs. And of course, back home, the pharmacist will take your prescription, and then that's it. Your prescription's gone. If you want to get more, you have to go back to your doctor. So that was interesting. And also, we call them pharmacies, but here they call them chemists or druggists. When we first came here, one of the things I noticed with our driver, and this was a driver that the hotel had sent to pick us up at the airport, was part of our package. He had short nails, but he had one long, really long pinky nail. And then as we were here, I noticed that like several men would have long nails. Not everybody by any means, but it was enough people that it was noticeable to me, and it raised my curiosity. So I hit Google. And according to what I found, and I'm not really sure if this is true or not, but according to what I found, the one long nail for some people signifies that they're in a more of a higher up position, I suppose, in life, or socioeconomically. It's just a way to show they could either have one long nail or, all their nails be long. It's just a way to show that they don't work with their hands, I suppose, and just live a good life, earn a decent wage. Really, really, really surprised to see buses drive down the street. And at home, well, I don't have a bus system in my small town. That's how small it is. But if you live in an area in Canada that has a bus system, typically how it works is that you wait at a designated bus stop. The bus comes along, it stops at the stop, you get on, you pay the driver, and you sit down. And then when you want to get off, you are let off at a designated bus stop. Here, I've seen people just kind of wander up to a bus that's been driving down the street, if the bus is just starting to roll by, or if it's kind of waiting at a stoplight, and hop on the bus. I'm not sure if they go up to the front and make sure to pay the driver or not. I assume they do, but I've never really seen too often and people just kind of hop on a bus whenever it seems to me, whenever they please. The difference would be, back home, the bus has a maximum amount of people that it's allowed to stuff on there, and when that quota has been reached, the bus will just drive off to wherever it needs to go, and it won't be picking up any new people until other people who are already on the bus get off. And here the buses sometimes have been just jammed full to the point where I'm like, how is that thing still able to roll down the street? Because there's so many people on there. And also, of course, being in Canada, we have summer and spring, winter, fall, the 4 seasons, but it can get extremely cold, and so the buses have doors. And here, a lot of the buses I've seen don't have doors. So that was a difference too, which I guess falls in line with people just hopping on whenever they want. It's pretty difficult to hop on a bus in Canada if he's rolling down the street because the door's closed. It seems to me that traffic here, with this being said, in my small town, back in Canada that I live in, people are terrible drivers. My opinion, but oh my god, people just seem to be awful, awful drivers. Here, people are awful drivers too, in a different way. Back home, people are awful, awful drivers in that they drive so slow. The speed limit could be 50, and they'll be doing 20 down the street. Here, I don't think that the speed limit goes very, very high. I don't think I've seen a speed limit as high as 50 kilometers an hour. I think I've seen maybe 20. But I can see why, because it's kind of like, I don't understand how people don't get into an accident every 5 seconds. I know that I'm just a foreigner in this land, and I don't get a lot of things, but oh my god, it seems like the wild, wild west out there. I still don't really quite understand how to cross the street, and the anxiety it gives me having to cross is just insane. People kind of drive down the street slowly enough that when, not if, but when somebody starts cutting them in front of them or they get super, super close, they can just stop really quickly. And I've noticed that the street outside of our hotel has 3 lanes, but here it doesn't seem to matter. I don't even know why the government bothered painting the lanes on the side of the road, because people just drive wherever they want. They'll be driving on top of the lane line, they'll be driving in between each other. If there's 3 lanes of cars waiting for a light and a scooter is coming by and there's room, they will absolutely curve on through and try to get to the front of the line. It just honestly feels like a free-for-all where everybody's out for themselves. And that's completely different than Canada, where you are expected to drive between the lines. You certainly wouldn't drive super, super close to people. It is extremely noisy. In Canada, typically you would give a couple of short beeps if you're trying to say hello to someone, or one really long honk if you're pissed off at somebody or they're doing something they shouldn't be doing. But otherwise, you pretty much don't use your horn. We're here, I said to my husband, we should move here and then get into the horn fixing business, because people are laying on their horn on, it seems like, a minutely basis. And because people are just driving wherever they seem to want to drive, and driving so close, I think a lot of the beeping is to kind of signal I'm here, or I'm passing you, or don't bump into me. But the first thing that I noticed in coming when we landed and we had to hop into a car is just how people are beeping every few minutes. Which I'm always impressed when we get a cab driver, because they'll be, the cab driver will be driving a stick shift. And then maybe if someone calls, will be on his phone driving a stick shift and making sure not to hit anybody. And there's people jumping out every 5 seconds. And he's still able somehow to beep his horn. They are the true multitaskers, in my opinion. To the horns, people, especially people on scooters and rickshaws, tend to signal with their hands where they would like to go, which kind of fascinates me. To signal where you want to go back home, you use your signal light, and that's pretty much it. But here, people will signal, and it's kind of funny that if somebody's driving a scooter and they have a passenger, it seems like a lot of times the passenger in the back will be signaling for the driver where they would like to go. I were coming back home from being at a museum or something one day, and I looked, and the other car was so close to our cab that there was no way I could open the door. So I said to him, could you imagine if we got into like a 5 or 6 car pileup and the ambulance had to come and try to get one of us out of the car? They wouldn't be able to move us because there's no way to open the door. There's such little space between cars. And I noticed that when the ambulance will go by, that people tend to try to get out of the way, but it just seems like a combination of there's so many people and so much traffic that there's nowhere to move, and people just really seem to be kind of out for themselves as far as getting where they want to go. So I certainly wouldn't want to be an ambulance driver in this city, and I certainly also wouldn't want to be the person in the back of the ambulance trying to get to the hospital, because, at home, when you hear the ambulance, the sirens go, everybody, by law, you're supposed to go off to the side of the road and stop and wait until the ambulance or the cop car or the fire truck goes by. And I know that doesn't happen all the time, but you're supposed to. And in here, it seems people try to get out of the way, but it doesn't seem very effective to me. I've seen people be stopped at red lights, and then if there's nobody coming from either direction, I've seen people just kind of go for it, whether the light's red or not, and just go where they need to go, even though they're not supposed to as far as the traffic light is concerned. I've also seen people drive down the wrong side of the road, so if it's facing one way and, they should be on the other side of the road if they want to go the other way, they'll just kind of drive down the wrong side of the road. Or if things are too congested and I guess they're in a super hurry, they'll just drive down the sidewalks along. Here, scooters are absolutely king, and with the sheer volume of traffic, I can certainly see why. They can get into tighter spaces, you can get places quicker, and probably don't have to worry so much about getting stuck waiting. Like, it just seems like at home, sometimes there's a 2-way street and sometimes there's a 1-way street where we're only supposed to go down in one direction. And there's been lots of times here where our car has went to turn down a street and it looks so narrow that it looks to me like it should be a one-way street, but somehow they squeeze through. I gave my husband the example of our cat when we go to close the door and she really wants to get in, and instead of being a certain size, suddenly she seems to like elongate and stretch and fit through this impossibly small space. I know that's not what actually happens, but that's what seems to happen with these cab drivers. It's like this tiny little space to squeeze through, and I'm like, there's no way you're not scraping up the sides of your car, and they get through the tightest spaces I've ever seen in my entire life. I'm not sure what the safety laws are like here as far as making people buckle up when they're driving. I know in many cabs that we've gotten, there's a seat belt that you can kind of pull over your shoulder in the back, but there's nothing to buckle it into. And that's happened many, many times. And on scooters here, I've seen whole families on scooters. I've seen one parent and a child sandwiched in between, and another parent and the child's asleep. There's lots of kids just on the front of the scooters with their parents, and the parents are like, hang on, and, have them, I guess, their arms around them holding on to the handles. I've seen infants on scooters where it's like one parent's driving and then the other parent was holding this little tiny infant in her arms on the scooter, which would never happen in Canada. In my opinion, things are a bit too much the other way in Canada where kids are bubble wrapped, but by law, back home, you have to have a child seat for your child up to a certain age or up to a certain weight or something like that. And there's no way that they have that law here because it just seems like however you're able to get somewhere, you get there that way. And if somebody, I suppose, has to transport something, it just seems like if you can fit it on that scooter, you can do it. I've seen people on scooters when there's a driver and then there's the passenger and there's so much, any manner of things in between them that they can possibly hold on to without it falling and them falling over, they do. One guy had a ladder. He was on the scooter. There was the guy driving, there's a guy behind hanging on to the ladder and hanging on to him, and then there was, this ladder on the scooter, and off they went. I was about to say as if it's normal, but it is normal for here. It's just extraordinary for me because I'm not from here. So that's definitely something that's different and still is something that makes my eyes kind of pop out of my head. It's like, what am I going to see them put on their scooters today? Back home, if ever I get a cab, which I try not to because I find them really, really expensive back home, cab drivers typically take you where you would like to go, and they don't typically stop to ask for directions like they do here. So oftentimes, and I think it's because Pune is such an enormous city. I'm thinking it's probably bigger than Toronto. It's a huge city, and even though we'll be getting into a cab and the cab driver will have GPS, and I think this happened more often with rickshaws, which didn't typically have GPS with us. Anyway, our driver would stop and ask for directions. So you go and say, I need to go somewhere. They'll say, sure, get in. They'll be driving, and then pull over and just kind of start talking to whoever is there, like, hey, roll down your window, we're such and such. Or they'll pull over and ask somebody who's strolling down the road going for a walk, hey, we're such and such, and that happens quite a bit. It hasn't really happened to me in Canada where you're in a cab and the cab's taking you somewhere. They pulls over to the side of the road to find out where he should or be going. One thing that I really, really love about this culture, one of the many, many things, is that it just seems to be so, so family-oriented. For a lot of people, Sunday is a day off, and the vibe is completely different. It's kind of like Monday to Friday, Monday to Saturday, people are working and doing their thing. You can see that the traffic's all lined up as people are trying to get places. But Sunday seems to be the day for a lot of people to relax and to just spend time with their family. But it just has a different vibe. Like, it just feels like the place is so family-oriented for a lot of people, and that family is everything. My husband and I went to a temple a few days ago, and we were really, really shocked when we were approached by a guy. He looked like he was in his maybe late teens or early 20s. He was just fascinated with us because we were Canadian, but what fascinated me was that he went and he got his whole family to come talk to us. And he was explaining that Sundays were for families in this culture. And there he was with his mother and his father and his sister. He introduced us to them. They were wonderful people. And they looked like the kids looked like they were maybe in their late teens and early 20s. And I know that that happens in Canada too, that there are people who are close with their families, but I don't often see people just kind of hanging out with their parents and making sure to block off a whole day just to spend with their family. So I'm not saying that that doesn't happen, but that's not something that I often see, and I thought that that was really cool. When you live somewhere and things just become normal to you, even though I always say there's really no such thing as normal, it's just what you're used to, you still become accustomed to certain ways of behavior. And I didn't realize until we came here how unusual it is to see parents carry infants in their arms. Typically, what I see is people put their children, their young children, in strollers. And I've seen a lot of people here just carrying their infants in their arms, which was just something that made me realize how not used to that I am. How I'm not used to seeing that in Canada. When you go to the movies here, I'm not sure how long this has been law, but when you go to the movies here, you have to stand for the national anthem of India, which I think, I have no, of course, idea what they're saying, but the song sounds beautiful to me. And I remember we went to see a movie, I can't remember what the name of it was, but that's not relevant, really. And every single time one of the characters in the movie smoked, or there was a picture of a cigarette or something, there was a little disclaimer at the bottom saying smoking kills, smoking kills, smoking kills, so that's definitely different. We just saw Thor today, and they bleeped out the curse words, which surprised me. It took me a little while to catch on to that. And movies that are played in English, at least in the theater that we've gone to, it has subtitles. So the actors are speaking English, and then underneath are English subtitles. And I can only assume that that's because of the accents. It might be harder for people here to understand what's being said because of the different accents and the different styles of speaking that people can use to speak the English language. Just how helpful people are here, and I think that people are also helpful where I'm from. But I have certainly been very, very grateful for just the sheer amount of help so many people. And of course, not everybody is helpful. There's good people and bad people no matter where you go. I don't want to give anyone the impression that if they come to Pune, India, everyone's just wonderful and helpful and going to help them. That's no. But we have been helped by a lot of people in the streets willing to give our cab drivers directions, or of course hotel staff or people in the street directing us here or there. And a big difference between where I'm from versus here would be that we came to this city, to this country, didn't know the culture, didn't know the traditions, didn't know the language, which of course is a real bad on us. But even with all that said, there's been so many people who are willing to help explain things to us, or help us find things, or help us out. And along with that is the fact that there's enough people here who speak enough English that they can help you. And that does not really happen in Canada. It doesn't really happen where I'm from. Let me just talk about that, because I can't speak for all of Canada. Where I'm from, basically you need to speak English or there's no way you're going to get by. And you need to speak good English or you're going to have a really, really, really hard time. Whereas here, even though we don't know the local language, I suppose there's 3 commonly spoken languages here. One is the local language, and then there's Hindi, and also a lot of people, although not everybody speaks English, and not everybody speaks English to the same as well as the others. Some don't speak English at all, some speak a little bit, some speak moderately, some speak very well. But there's no way that anybody from here who doesn't know very good English could come to where I'm from and expect to get by, unfortunately. But yet we have come here and we don't know the 2 languages of the land, of the city, and we've been able to get by just fine. If we talk to somebody and they don't know English, then somebody else will probably come over who does know English better. Or we can, because of course there's the accents that come into play as well, so somebody might know English pretty well, but because of our North American accent, that might throw them off. We might whip out our phone and type in what we need to ask in our Google Translate app, and then they'll start speaking English back when they finally understand what we're trying to say.